It's Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And today I am coming at you with my overview of the Every Bit Counts Challenge for August of 2024. So this is where I tell you everything that I preserved in the month of August, as well as what I think about it, things that I learned, and would I do it again next year. So let's get started. So first, I'm going to tell you everything that I preserved. Now, I don't have everything that I preserved on this table, but I do have a list of everything that I preserved, and I'm going to go over that with you. First, I'm going to talk about the dried items. The majority of things that I did were drying items this year. Now, I dried items, I froze items, I canned items, and then I also did like a special project, which I'll talk about as well. So for dried items, one of the things that I do on a regular basis, and I've mentioned this in each of my videos, but again, I'm gonna mention it here, is I save our coffee grounds. And when we're done with our coffee grounds, I dry them, and then I put them in an old coffee ground container. I use this for my potting soil mix, as well as for my vermicompost and any plants that need more acid. So I do that on a regular basis. Any day that we have coffee, I'm saving the grounds. So this next one I do whenever we have eggs, and I save our eggshells. So I wash them, I dry them, I save them in here, and then I will powder them up, and then I use them again in our potting soil mix. I will put some in with my vermicompost for my worms, but I also use them directly in the garden to help my plants, prevent them from getting blossom end rot, and to give them some more calcium. I did create a video on that, and I will link that above. The next thing that I do is whenever I have some tea, I dry the tea and then I put it in here, and this is my little compost bin. This is the compost bin I use for my dried goods. So anytime I dehydrate something and it falls, at the bottom of the dehydrator, then I'll take it, I'll put it in here for my worms for vermicomposting, but I also do that with my tea. Anytime I have tea, I will take the tea leaves and materials and I'll put them in here, and then I give them to my worms. Those are things that I do on a regular basis. The other thing that I did, which I didn't bring in here, is I dehydrated some banana peels. So my husband had some bananas. One of the times he had the bananas, I actually had the time to make some banana peel water. So I will water my plants with that. And then I take those leftover peels and then I dehydrate them. The other time I just dehydrated the peels because I didn't have the time to do the water. For those, I will powder them up. And then again, like these other things, I'll add them to my potting soil mix and or to my vermicompost, just to give those things more nutrients. Now, those I forgot to put on the table, but I did do those as well. We did that twice. And again, the coffee grounds I do daily, the eggs anytime we have eggs, and then the tea anytime I have tea. So all those were done multiple times. Same thing with the banana peels. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to kind of go in order of how I have things on the table. Any of my frozen things I did not put on the table, so I will be talking about that. And I have some pictures of things, so I'll just be posting them as I'm talking about them so you can see them. Okay, so the next thing that I did, and these, by the way, are in no particular order. They're just in the order of the way that I have them on the table. So this is not in order of when I actually did these items. So one of the things I did from a drying perspective is I dried some basil seeds. If you watch my video that I did for this particular week, it was either week 2 or week 3, I got basil seeds basically by accident. I didn't realize it, but I happened to have this at the bottom of some basil plants that I had in water until I was going to turn them into some other things, and I caught the basil seeds, so I'm going to use those for next year. Another thing that I did is I am drying some lunchbox sweet snacking pepper seeds. I really like these little peppers, and I'm going to save the seeds so I can plant them myself next year. I dried some sugar snap peas so that I can plant these next year. And then I am drying green beans because some of those bean pods get a little too big, and when they get a little too big, then I open them up and I dry the bean pods. And I've done this multiple times on multiple different days. I did 2 projects with some nasturtiums, so I have some dried nasturtium flowers and the leaves, and these I will use as like a pepper replacement. So you can use these fresh in salads, just eat as is. You can dry them and then powder them up and then use them as a pepper replacement. I have not done that yet. So this is the first time I actually dried them to use them as a pepper replacement. The other thing I suppose you could do with these, which I might actually do, I never thought of it until now, is I can use these in my bone broth as well to give some of that natural pepper flavor, because you use peppercorns in that. And I could actually use these, so I might actually do that. I have a bunch of nasturtium flowers that I planted this summer, and they're doing really well. So I think I'm gonna do that with the rest of them. Also with nasturtiums, so they have this little green or a light colored seed, and sometimes it just falls off the plant. And so when it falls off and I see it, I pick it up and then I save it. And then as they dry, they're hard and brown. And this is actually the seed that you're going to plant when you want to grow some nasturtiums. You actually need to peel some of that paper bark off in order to get it to actually germinate. So I am drying some nasturtium seeds for next year. So then the next thing, I had these garlic bulbils. So I planted garlic. They were all hardneck, and I didn't cut the scapes this year. I just didn't have the time. So when I pulled all my garlic, I had them drying on a drying rack, and those scapes then opened up to these little garlic bulbil heads. And so there's a bunch of these little bulbils that are in here, and there's just like a ton of very, very little itty bitty garlic. And so what I did is I harvested them, and we used some of these in multiple recipes, but I also froze some in some ice cube trays with olive oil, so that when we want to use those in the future, we can just take one of those cubes out of the freezer and then put it right in the pan. And so we already have garlic and olive oil. And what I might do is I might actually do that with the rest of these, just to use them up and get them in the freezer. But that is what I did. So I dried them and I also froze some. Now the next thing was some ramp seeds. So I had mentioned in one of my videos, we had been working on a mulching project, and when I was mulching around our ramp plants, some of them broke off, and so the tops had these little seed heads on them, and I was just letting them dry naturally here. In the meantime, while these were drying, my ramps that are actually in my landscaping, all those seed heads dried, and now I have all these black little seeds. So what I did is I harvested them and then I cleaned them up, and so now I have all these ramp seeds. And what I'll do is I'm actually going to sell these ramp seeds. I'll make little ramp seed packets, and then I will sell them. If you are interested in any, you can email allabouttheharvest@gmail.com and I can get you that information. The next thing I did, which I never said in any of my videos, I forgot to mention, so this is kind of like a bonus that I never mentioned when I was doing my weekly videos for this Every Bit Counts challenge. What I did is I had harvested some of our onions. I had let them dry on our drying rack that my husband made out in our garage, so they were drying. And one of the things that I was doing is I was cleaning those up. So, you know, when onions dry, they have these long green tops. You let them dry and let them wilt, and then you kind of clean them up, cut them up. There were 4 onions that I had harvested that had these beautiful, and these are dry now, but they were these beautiful white big flowers. As they were drying, much like with the garlic scapes, these flowers then opened up and there's all these seeds in here. So these are, I have 4 of these. I only grabbed 2. I have all of these onion seeds that I am going to save And then I'm gonna actually plant some this fall to see if they'll come up in the spring naturally, just as a test. So that was something I never actually said in my video, but when I was going out to the drying rack to grab some of these to bring in to remind me that, you know, I did harvest and clean these up, I saw those and I thought, oh my gosh, I never said anything about that in any of my videos. Also, I harvested a bunch of Egyptian walking onions. Those are drying. The ones that I had harvested a month prior, I then cleaned them up as well. They're like finishing their curing process out there. So that was another thing that I did. And this was the garlic. I cleaned it up and then was just letting it completely dry out there. And I'll be planting some garlic again in October, so just to start that process again. Then the other drying project that I'm doing is our hot cayenne pepper. So my husband bought a hot cayenne pepper plant. It is just absolutely beautiful and it's very large. And so as they turn red, I've been taking them off of the plant and drying them or just letting them sit out and dry. If they get knocked off, then in their green, then the same thing. We did take one off just recently, just this last week, that was green to see if it would turn red as it's drying, and it looks like it actually will. So this is starting to turn red, so we'll see how that goes. That's what we started with the hot cayenne peppers. We have plenty more to do. My goal is after these are all dried and when we need more cayenne pepper, then we're going to blend this up to make cayenne pepper. Another drying project we did was dill. So I have dill that comes up in my garden every year ever since I planted it once. As it needs to be harvested, I'll just harvest it and dry it. I was able to harvest a few elderflowers in the month of August. Most of these other ones I harvested earlier in probably June and July. But in August, there were some that were still on, and so I just harvested them and dried them to add them to my elderflower collection so that I can use them in teas and different herbal remedies. I harvested a lot of elderberries this year, and I dried a lot of them. In total, I have 5 half-gallon jars of dried elderberries this year. In the month of August, I think I did about 3 half-gallon jars. I also turned elderberries into juice. So I have a steamer juicer, and so I did steam juice some elderberries. Unfortunately, I can't can elderberry juice anymore because the National Center for Home Food Preservation and the USDA found that they're actually not as acidic as it was. My particular variety of elderberries is a more acidic variety. I have the Adams elderberry variety, but I always follow safe, tested, and approved canning methods. And so we can no longer can elderberry juice. So what I did is I ended up freezing that elderberry juice, and that was 12 3/4 cups of elderberry juice. So I froze it in various different containers, different sizes for me to use. In fact, I just took some juice out and made some elderberry syrup. So that's usually what I do with that juice is I'll turn it into elderberry syrup, but I could also use it to make elderberry wine, etc. So that was one of the things that I had froze was elderberry juice. And then again, I dehydrated a lot of elderberries, which I will be selling those as well. The next thing that I did from a drying perspective was some chives. So in one of my videos for this challenge, I talked about how I have 2 different kind of versions of chives. I have some that are in some containers and they are more of a thin type of a chive, and then I have some that I planted in my garden. Apparently I planted them in my garden last year and I do not remember it, and they are a little bit bigger and wider. And so I basically I cut them all back and I dehydrated them, and I put the ones that were the thinner ones in this jar, and I put the bigger ones that I call garden chives in this jar. I just did it because one was bigger and one was thinner. And those are ready to get harvested again and dry again. So I dried chives. Then the next thing I did is I made sun-dried tomatoes. So I take my Juliet tomatoes. They're like a cherry tomato. They're actually a grape-sized tomato. They're almost like a mini Roma, and I cut them in half, and then I season them with a tailing seasoning, and then I dehydrate them. And we use these as sun-dried tomatoes. Now, this was my first batch that I did, and I just did this last week, so at the end of August. And I put them in this half-gallon jar because I have a lot more that I have to dehydrate. As they get ripe, I'll be dehydrating them. So I put them in this half-gallon jar because I know that I'm gonna fill this up, and I'll probably go into another jar as well. So I did sun-dried tomatoes, which we love, and then I dehydrated parsley. So I have 4 parsley plants that self-seeded from last year, and so I've been dehydrating them as they continue to produce, and I've dehydrated multiple times so far this summer, but in August I only dehydrated once. I cut them all and then dehydrated them, and this is my second jar this year, my second half-gallon jar. They're ready to be harvested again and dehydrate again. I took those stems from the parsley and I froze those stems, and the stems I use in my bone broth. So bone broth calls for parsley, so I use my parsley stems as part of what I put in my bone broth, because then I'm not wasting it. And some of these dried projects I have done multiple times, like the elderberries. I did week 1, week 2, and week 3, and I did them on multiple days. So next I am going to talk about some of my frozen items that I did. So I froze basil stems, tops, and leaves, and those I will again also put in my bone broth or my vegetable broth. So when I'm making that, I will use that in there to flavor it and to also give it some nutrients. I mentioned the parsley stems, I did that as well. I did mention the elderberry juice, so I did freeze 12 3/4 cups of elderberry juice. I also made coffee ice cubes. When we have coffee that we don't drink, then I will make coffee ice cubes, and I'll use that if I'm gonna make like an iced coffee, or sometimes just to put in my coffee to cool it down. I will use those coffee ice cubes. So 2 times I made some coffee ice cubes because I was out of that. Then the other thing I made was a chaga water, chaga tea, and that is a combination of chaga chunks, bay leaves that I get from Bequay, so they're more of like a cinnamon flavor, cinnamon sticks, and whole cloves. And I put those in a crock pot and I let them simmer, and then when that water gets nice and dark, I will take them out, strain it out, and then I will freeze that into ice cubes as well as in bottles. And I usually do that a couple times so that I have a lot. I'd been out of that for quite a while, and so I did that so that I'd have it. I use that also in my coffee. You could drink it as is, but usually I use it to cool down my coffee. So that is what I did with the chaga. I had mentioned that I did the garlic bulbils with the olive oil. I did 2 different cilantro projects. The first one I did was chopped up cilantro really fine, and then I added fresh squeezed lime juice. I put those in ice cube trays, and then I froze those. So when my cilantro wasn't in season and I needed some for, say, like a salsa recipe or whatever recipe that I may need that for, I have it and I could just take it out of the freezer. The other time I did that in the last week in August, and that was where I just chopped up the cilantro and then I added water, and I made that in 1 tablespoon sizes for the cilantro. And so the canning recipe that I use for zesty salsa calls for 2 tablespoons of finely chopped cilantro. So what I did is I made those in 1 tablespoon sizes so that I knew that if I needed that when I was gonna can that salsa, that I would have it and I could then just thaw it and throw it in there. So that is why I did that in that particular size. The next thing that I froze was carrot tops. So I harvested some carrots from my garden, and the carrot tops are also very, very nutritious. So I clean them up and then I cut them off, and then I freeze them and I put them in my freezer. And again, I use those in my bone broth. I froze jalapeno poppers. So we had a lot of jalapenos, and I made some up like I normally would, and then I froze them. And I haven't eaten those yet, but I want to test them because I just harvested about 30 more jalapeno, and I would like to actually make some jalapeno poppers so that they're ready whenever we want, not just when they're in season. And so, but I want to test the frozen poppers that I made to make sure that they're going to have the consistency that we want when we bake them after we freeze them. So I did make jalapeno poppers and froze them. And then the last thing that I froze was basil pesto. So with all that basil that I harvested, I did make basil pesto for my husband. I had 3 jars of basil pesto that I froze. I made basil pesto earlier this year as well, but in the month of August, I froze 3 jars of basil pesto. And then on to my canning projects. So I had 4 different canning projects I did, and one of them was crushed tomatoes. All of these recipes are safe, tested, and approved canning recipes. And again, if you want to learn how to can the safe, tested, and approved way, I do teach canning courses, both water bath canning and pressure canning, and I do have the links to those courses. I'll put them in the description below this video. Again, I only teach safe, tested, and approved methods for canning, so you know that what I teach you is going to be the right way. And as a surprise and a special for everyone, I decided I am going to keep my canning courses on special price until the end of September. So if you didn't get my canning courses and you want to get them, the price is still on sale, the best price it's ever been at, and it will be on sale until the end of September. You can go to www.allabouttheharvest.com, or you can go to the specific canning courses, and I will link those below that you can look at them, learn more, and you can find out the prices there. So for the crushed tomatoes, in August, I canned this once on August 20th, and this made 8 quarts. Now I since canned some more of these just a couple days ago actually. So September 2nd, I canned more of these, and I made 13 additional quarts of this recipe. But for the month of August, I did 8 quarts. And my sister loves this recipe, so I basically made most all of those for her. I'll use some in some chili. The next recipe that I did on August 31st, so I got this in at the end of the month, was zesty salsa. So for the zesty salsa, I made a double batch, and that made 19 pints of the salsa. My neighbor really loves this recipe, so I made sure to make this recipe for him. And we love salsa as well, but that is his favorite and he always requests it. So the next recipe I made, and again, these are in no particular order of actually when I made them, the next recipe I'm showing you is pickled banana pepper rings. And I made this on August 11th. I made this because my sister likes pickled banana peppers. And when I made this recipe, I believe this made 10 jars. I made 9 pints and 1 10-ounce jar. Pickled banana pepper rings, this was a new recipe for me. And then the other one that was a new recipe, again, that I made in August was also on August 11th, and this was jalapeno jelly. So this is something that my husband had requested, so I made this jalapeno jelly, and this made 7 half-pint jars, and then we had basically 4 ounces left, so we just put that in a container in the fridge to have. Instead of just canning a little 4-ounce jar, we thought we would just have it in the fridge. So that was my 4th canning project that I did in the month of August. So now the other project that I did that was like a non-traditional project that I mentioned, I did this in that first week. I made an insect repellent with the herbs and the plants from my garden and my landscaping. And I had started it at the very end of July, but then I added to it that first week in August. And so this has a combination of multiple different flowers and plants from my garden and landscaping. And then this has to sit for a couple weeks. So this is actually ready, but I'm going to let it sit for a while because I don't need it right now, so I'm just gonna kind of let it macerate more. But that is actually a concentrate. So it has witch hazel in it and a bunch of these herbs, and then you strain everything out and then you add it with some water and you can add essential oils too if you want, and then you have a natural bug repellent. So I was excited to be able to use a lot of the plants in my landscaping and in my garden for that, and make something that's natural that I know what's in it. So I'm really excited about that. So that was the different projects that I did. So now let me just give you the tally of the different projects that I did. Again, some of them I did multiple times, but I'm going to just give you the numbers of the different projects that I did. So from a dried items perspective, I did 22 different projects. Again, some of them multiple times. For frozen items, I did 11 different projects. Canned items, I did 4 different projects. And then that bug repellent I'm calling other, so I did 1. So if I add them up, it's 38 different projects that I did in the month of August, which means I did surpass my goal of doing at least 31 different food preservation projects. So I am happy to report that I did hit my goal. So now I want to give you a little bit about my learnings and takeaways from this challenge, things that I want to remember for next year, and maybe things that you might want to know or think about if you decide to do this challenge next year. So this challenge is always in the month of August, and Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead is the one who started to create this challenge. She did it because she wanted to put up a little bit of something every day in the month of August instead of doing everything at the very end of the garden season and just being busy all weekend long. And so what she decided to do was just do a little bit every day. And that's where this challenge came about, is she just started doing it for herself. She posted about it on her Instagram and YouTube, and people started joining her. And so now a bunch of people do this. And this was the first year I decided to do it officially and post about it on YouTube. If you're interested in doing this, then I invite you to join us definitely for doing this next year, or you can start now. It doesn't matter. You don't have to do it in the month of August. I often thought, when I've been watching this for the last few years, I often thought, oh, I will do this in the month of September, because for me, September is more of a prime harvesting season. But as I can attest, in the month of August, I can do that as well. Okay, so here is what I learned from this challenge. The first thing is give yourself grace if things don't go as expected, or if you can't do it all. There are no Every Bit Counts police out there saying you didn't do something or you should be doing something. It's really just you policing yourself. For example, for us, we had a very large berm and landscaping project, and that got me really busy and took me away from some preservation projects that I would have liked to have done. I had a rummage sale in August, and I didn't think about how much that would take me out of doing the food preservation. I was basically the sole person running that. I was the sole person doing things for that. And so it did take a lot. It basically took me out for a week total. I wasn't able to do as much as I wanted during that time, and I really felt stressed out about it. So again, give yourself grace. The other thing I learned about that is if I were to do this challenge again, I wouldn't have a rummage sale during this month. We were supposed to go camping for Labor Day weekend, and that would have caused me to not be able to preserve as much as I did. However, I had gotten a call from work that I would need to be going out of town, potentially this week actually. We ended up deciding to stay home, and that allowed me to get some additional food preservation projects in as well. But if I was gone for camping, then I wouldn't have gotten as many projects as I did. You got to keep that in mind. You know, there is a balance. You have to live life, but you also want to preserve this food that you have so it doesn't go bad. The other thing that I thought about and learned from this challenge is that, you know, my freezers are pretty full. So to find that extra room to put some of these things in was difficult. And that wasn't a surprise to me, but I think it was more of a surprise to me than I had thought. So what I realized is I need to use and can fruit from our freezer, but it was really hard with our new produce coming in every day from our garden. So I'm trying to use the stuff that we have, like use it fresh. And then when I get a lot of something, I'm trying to preserve it. But canning can take a while. So if I was trying to do something quick, I might freeze it, and depending upon what it was. And so if you don't have the room in your freezer, where are you gonna put it, right? I realized that for next year, I need to make sure that I have more room in my freezer. And I actually need to like preserve food that is in my freezer. So for example, in July, I had a lot of currants from my currant bush, and I just froze them. I could be thawing those, and I could be making currant jam or jelly, right? I could be doing different things with that, but I just didn't, because right now my garden is so full and my landscaping is ready to be harvested that I just need to do that. I don't have time to take stuff that's in the freezer and make something else from it. So in the future for next year, I'm going to remember that. And that brings up another thing. Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead also does a pantry challenge in the month of January and February. And in that pantry challenge, she encourages you to use things that you already have in your house, in your freezer, in your pantries, and not go shopping. So basically, you are using the things that you have, that you preserved during this challenge, and you are then making room for preserving things again in the summertime. So I'm really looking forward to that. I will do it as much as I can. I might be gone for traveling for work, but while I'm here, I'll definitely be using that. And I do know that in the wintertime, we do use a lot more of my canned goods and things like that. I'm looking forward to really doing that and making a conscious effort of using things from our freezer. So the other thing was, this challenge had me looking for quick opportunities to preserve things, which was really good, because typically at the end of the summer and into the fall, I am starting to really focus on, I need to preserve this before we get our first frost. And what I find is in October, I'm like hacking all these plants back. I'm trying to dehydrate them, but you know, you can only dehydrate so many things at a time. So then I'm trying to freeze them, and you already know my freezer's full. So it's like, how do you manage everything? And so the nice thing about this challenge is you do a little bit every day, so that you're not having to run into that when it comes to right before your frost. So the other thing I liked is that I wrote down everything that I preserved, and it was really cool to see how much I did in 1 month, to actually put numbers to what I did. It was just very interesting to me. Now, what I wish I would have done more of was given specific quantities. Like I wrote that I preserved these crushed tomatoes, but then I didn't write down how many jars, and so I had to kind of go back and look. So I wish I would have done that a little bit more, and I will do that more in the next challenge, so that I'm not having to go back or just say, hey, I froze this, or I did this. Like, I can actually give you more of the numbers. But regardless, it was still cool to see like this many different projects. That was really neat. The last thing is, I wish I would have canned more items. I really am a canner. I obviously dehydrate a lot as well, but I wish I would have canned more. But looking back at it, because of our growing season, I typically do can more in the fall anyways. And then some of the other projects that I like to do, as I do in the winter. So I make all of my bone broth, generally speaking, in the fall and in the winter. I'll take my dried beans and then I will make those into canned beans. The dried beans, things like that, I will do that during the winter, maybe the early spring. It's basically when I don't have any other garden or landscape projects going where I have to harvest all of this stuff from there. And so I have more of the time to do it at my leisure. So I'm generally canning all the time. It depends on what it is and when it is. So as a canner and somebody who promotes canning and has canning courses, I was kind of sad that I only did 4 canning projects in the month of August, but I also have to remember I typically do a lot of my canning projects in September and October and November. So this shouldn't have been a surprise to me, but I think it just was for some reason. So all of that to say, overall, what did I think of this? I really enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. I loved seeing what I all did, writing it down, kind of showing me what I did. Also, would I do it next year? Absolutely, 100%. Again, I would take some of those little caveats, like, okay, don't schedule big projects, don't have your rummage sale in the month of August, do it at a different time, and give yourself grace. Heaven forbid, you're not feeling good, or you have to go on a trip for work, or for pleasure, don't beat yourself up. All of that to say, I would definitely 100% do this again. I hope you join me. So next year, if you want to do this, definitely join me. If you're looking at doing the pantry challenge in the beginning of the next year, let's do that together as well. If you have any questions for me about the Every Bit Counts challenge, put that in the comments below. Also, what did you preserve? Put that in the comments below. Or if you have numbers like I did this many drying projects, this many canning projects, this many freezing projects, put that in the comments below. I'd love to hear. I always love to get insight and inspiration from other people. And if there was something that you did that you would do again next year, or something that you did that you probably wouldn't do in the future, put that in the comments below as well. I'd always love to read and hear about those things. Again, this is Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And until next time, happy preserving.